Educators demand that students learn an incredible amount of material, but most never provide the specific skills needed to accomplish that task. It is like throwing a child into the deep end of a swimming pool and demanding they swim without ever teaching them the basic mechanics of how to stay afloat. Without these skills, students default to what feels productive: massed practice. You sit at your desk for 12 hours straight, forcing facts into your head until dawn, and you actually manage to ace the exam the next morning. But passing a test is not the same thing as learning. Within a week of that exam, research shows that 75% of that information will be lost. Consider the experience of one undergraduate who took 2 years of Spanish and earned straight A's. She even lived in a Spanish-speaking country for a year, yet today she remembers only 30 words. All those years of intense cramming resulted in almost zero long-term retention. That high failure rate is why neuroscientists are so blunt about this method. They define cramming as an irrational act if your actual goal is to retain knowledge for the future. The problem is the illusion of competence. That immediate feeling of mastery right after a massive study session tricks you into thinking the information is secure, but you are actually just witnessing the temporary limits of your short-term storage. To understand why, look at the hippocampus, the brain's intake center for new information. It catches data rapidly, but acts like a very narrow funnel. When cramming, you force massive data volumes into this fragile storage. Exceeding its structural limits, the data simply spills over. Because cramming happens in a single continuous block, the brain does not have the necessary downtime to build the stable retrieval queues needed to find that information later. A 12-hour cram session is also physically exhausting. When the exam ends and the stress level drops, your brain receives a neurochemical signal that the information is no longer a priority for survival. During your next sleep cycle, the brain begins a biological purge, actively clearing out unanchored data in the hippocampus to make room for new inputs. In this sense, cramming is a biological trigger. It effectively instructs your brain that the information you just studied is temporary and can be erased. Real learning is a physical process. When stored correctly, brain cells establish new connections to form networks. This physical rewiring is called long-term potentiation. Creating this new physical infrastructure requires steady, spaced-out effort over time. You cannot force glowing synaptic pathways to thicken in a single burst of energy. The way to trigger this physical growth is a technique called distributed practice. Spacing out study sessions forces the brain to migrate data from the narrow hippocampus into the broad, high-capacity neocortex. Every time you recall information after a break, your brain physically thickens that neural trail, creating permanent, high-speed retrieval queues for the future. This means that long-term mastery is less about how much data you can hold at once, and more about how robustly you have built these physical pathways to retrieve it. This suggests that the rapid forgetting we experience after a test isn't necessarily a failure of our mental capacity. It is often a direct consequence of a study strategy that failed to trigger the brain's long-term storage process. There is a biological parallel here between brain cells and muscle tissue. You cannot achieve a month's worth of structural muscle growth in a single 10-hour session the day before a competition. The tissue needs time to recover and rebuild. To learn in harmony with this biology, you must review material daily in short bursts. Instead of passively rereading, you must actively force your brain to retrieve the information. You also need between 7.5 and 9 hours of sleep. This is not just for rest. It is a requirement for the physical transfer of data into permanent storage. While you sleep, the brain produces sharp wave ripples. These short, transient ray waves are specifically responsible for consolidating and stabilizing new memories. By trading the exhaustion of massed practice for the steady rhythm of distributed practice, you stop fighting your own biology. You finally begin learning in harmony with your brain.